Hello, author and attorney Kelly O'Connell here with Knockout Radio, and I had mentioned yesterday that I was going to do a show on Shariah law, and I decided to do one for today for you, and I'll throw in a little bit of Middle Eastern style music that some people have told me they find very grating, but anyway, Shariah law is the law of Islam, and it is old. Goes back to the 6th century, or the 600s, I should say. 610 is when the revelation of Muhammad occurred. So 7th century, early 7th century, and it developed for about 100 years, and then they say that the time of the law closed, then there was the closing of the doors, basically, is how it was explained. So about 100 years of building of the law. Now, Shariah law is made out of a number of things, and if you read Joseph Schacht, who I consider to be a great and unparalleled historian, he was German. He was laboring in Germany and left because of the Nazis, and he's considered to be by some the greatest Orientalist, which is what they call people who study Islamic topics. Orientalist for some reason, even though these people are not Oriental for the most part. So he did some tremendous work. And then there's another guy by the name of Ignaz Goldziher, if you want to look up the two great names in the history of Islamic law, Western study of Islamic law. But anyway, there's a lot of fury going on in Afghanistan, in the United States, across the world, in Europe. People can't believe that Joe Biden so casually left Afghanistan. It's still shocking. It is kind of like, everybody has friends that have a hard time with bills, that maybe never make enough money and end up moving a lot. And it's just kind of in the middle of the night, and everything that you can fit in the pickup truck and the station wagon you take off with and leave everything else behind. And this was kind of like it. Biden put out this message that they were going to leave. They did not tell, and obviously on purpose did not tell the Afghanis exactly when they were leaving. The Afghani army didn't know, and so when they woke up the next day and everything was gone, people were shocked, and that's when the Taliban really started to pour in. And Joe Biden has been interviewed a couple of times on this. He gave a speech, and he's been very explicit in saying that he feels like he did the right thing. No matter what happened, there would be a mess, there would be chaos, so he decided to do it now as opposed to later. He did not want to leave a bunch of military behind to fight, and had already gotten rid of the bombing runs and such against the Muslims, terrorists. So the upshot is that now the one place where they can leave from, the airport, is surrounded by the Taliban, and it is very sad. There's a lot of sad stories, and the Taliban promised they wouldn't bring in any laws against women or other kind of onerous laws, and the fact of the matter is, of course, they already started doing it, which I knew was going to happen. So I started studying Islamic law when I was in law school, and was walking around in the library, and I saw a book called Introduction to Islamic Law, Noel Colson, which was one of the classics. And I believe Noel Colson went to the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, as part of the oil industry, and ended up studying the law, and then wrote a book, which I don't think is probably maybe 90 pages, but very interesting book, and a classic, absolute classic. And then I just started collecting books on it and reading it, and I've written some articles on it and published probably 10 articles in Canada Free Press on Shariah law one way or the other. And one of my articles was picked up by Saylor University to be used in a course, which I felt pretty good about that. So anyway, today's show, Afghanistan, Islam, and Apostasy, Rejection of Classic Faith. and what does the future hold for Afghanis returning to live under radical Islam. So would be very scary to be over there right now. But I decided to pick one topic to broach the subject of Sharia law and to just talk about how it's applied. So as Afghanis fall back into the hands of the Taliban, there's a lot of concern about how they're going to be treated. Issues include what fundamentalists consider apostasy, and there's a lot written on it. And the most classic work was written by Samuel Zwemer. And he was a missionary to the Muslim world for something like 40 years. I think he was from some place like Michigan or Wisconsin, and a brilliant scholar, and did a lot of writing when he was out. And I don't know that he ever was ever able to confirm that anybody had converted under him. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is the law of apostasy in Islam. So an apostate is a person who turns their back on the one true faith, and while the Taliban promises to not mistreat the populace, ominous signs are already appearing. Young girls said to be being led away into marriage, which, don't forget that Muhammad had married a girl somewhere between 5 and 7, and then it was consummated from somewhere between 7 and 9. And I believe her name was Khadijah, and she remembered being on a swing and holding a doll when her mother came out and took her by the hand and brought her in the house and introduced her to Muhammad, and who in that at time would have probably been around 50. Maybe he was 45. Muhammad had met his wife, who was a trader and a wealthy woman who was, as I recall, 15 years older than him, and that he had had this experience. I think he was around 40. I have to go back and check all my notes. So if I make a mistake on something like this, please be a little forgiving, but I'm just going off of a book that I read when I was in Ireland, working in Ireland. But he was obviously charismatic and kind of had a poetic temperament, and there was a type of thing that men did in this part of Saudi Arabia if they became wealthy at all, is that they would go out in the desert. A certain type of person would go out in the desert and meditate, try to commune with God and everything. And I'll give you a little story on the history of Muhammad. He had been at this point in his life, and he went out and I think he was essentially in a cave or something like that, but he was meditating and felt like Satan had talked to him and was very upset, and he talked to his wife, and his wife said basically, honey, that's not Satan, that's God. So he felt a little bit better, and he started, kind of collecting his experiences. And then famously, Muhammad was illiterate, so he had help writing this stuff down, collecting it into the Quran and such. And so he came to the city fathers in Mecca, where he was born and raised, and he told them that he was informed by God that there was to be no more worship of idols, and people were absolutely furious and besides themselves with anger, because this was Mecca was a famous pagan site for worship and visiting and such. That was the economy, and they were on the Silk Road too, of course. But so there was a fight, and Muhammad left, and he went over to Medina. He went to the Jewish leaders in Medina and said, I am your prophet. And they said, well, wait a second, are you from the line of David? And he said, no. They go, well, hold on a second, are you Jewish? And he said, no. And they said, well, they laughed at him and said, you can't be our Messiah then. And so they kicked him out, and he was very upset at him. and a lot of people feel like that's the bad blood that was to this day between Islam and the Jews. Then he ended up going to the Christians, and he explained that he was, the Messiah for the Christians, and they felt like he was mentally impaired, mentally ill, and brought him in and cared for him for a couple of years, and then he got himself organized and went back to Mecca, and there was a fight, there was a battle of the trench, in which he was able to overcome the Meccans. There was an agreement with the city of Mecca that there could be 3 gods worshipped. They'd have to get rid of all the rest. And then after a certain period of time, then that was banished, and there was just one God, Allah. And so the 3 verses were called the Satanic verses. And so those were abrogated. Those were never to be mentioned again. So when Solomon Rushdie wrote that book with the title Satanic Verses, then that's where the fury came from. And then Muhammad kind of gets himself organized there, gets his men together, and then they go back to Medina, and he at this point has soldiers with him, and he confronts the Jewish leaders over there and wants, and brings the men out, and then beheads somewhere between, I believe, 700 and 900 Jewish men. So that's the story. Okay. So, and if you disagree, make sure that you make a note on the YouTube. So, in any event, the issue is apostasy, and an apostate turns the back on the true faith. So, while the Taliban have a promise not to mistreat the populace, you've got already door-to-door looking for government soldiers that fought against them. And they had video of one lady that they said was shot because she didn't wear the veil. So what does the future hold? And so Sharia law is the center of Muslim life, not the Quran. Sharia means the path to the stream, and is considered a manifestation of Allah's will. And the Quran itself is said to exist originally in what they call a mother book, which is in the very bosom of Allah, from time out of mind, from the beginning of eternity. But the Sharia is not the Quran, and that's kind of confusing to some people. Is in Christianity and Judaism, or at least Christianity, the Bible is the most important book, the most important source, whereas in Islam, the most important source for direction is Sharia. And so that, I think, shows you that there's a very legalistic turn of mind in Islam. So, Joseph Schacht, who I had mentioned, wrote a book, Introduction to Islamic Law. That's not the same one as Noel Colson. It seems like everybody who writes an important book on Islam names it that. But he says, Islamic law is the epitome of Islamic thought, the most typical manifestation of the Islamic way of life, the core and kernel of Islam itself. And so Sharia doctrines must be followed, and their abandonment must be punished. And, Arabs or Muslims believe that the Sharia is from God every bit as much as the Levitical laws or the laws of Moses on the mountain were from God. And so that explains their attachment to it. Now, out of the 4 schools of Islam, apostolic Islam, not apostolic, but apostasy in Islam is not just abandonment of the faith, but an act or a statement, any act or statement implying unbelief, like denying a fundamental tenet or creed of Islam. Now, if you look at what's happened in Afghanistan, the modernization itself is an act of apostasy because it's a rejection of the way of dress. It's a rejection of the way of life. It's a rejection of the female's role. You saw that there were a lot of women in Kabul that were teaching they were working as bankers. Some of them were in the Senate. Others were attorneys, or they were doctors or whatever. And the Taliban, being traditionalist, fundamentalists, would not accept that. So there's a real problem for these women. And if you think that the Taliban is going to look the other way, they're not, because their entire reason for being around is to follow the Sharia. So the Quran addresses apostasy in chapter 4, verse 89, but if they turn their back from Islam, take a hold of them and kill them wherever you find them. And so Samuel Zwemer, who I already mentioned, wrote, the word apostate in Arabic is murtad, double D, and one who apostatizes is called artad and dinhi, i.e. one who turns his back on religion. Zwemer notes, crimes demanding corporal punishment. There's 7: rebellion, apostasy, adultery on the part of a free woman. A man can't commit adultery in Islam. Reviling, wine drinking, theft and highway robbery. And for, highway robbery is a big deal in the Sharia for some reason. So the Muslim, an astute Muslim will point out there's no conversion in Islam. You can stay a Christian or you can stay a Jew if you live in Muslim lands. But Muslim apologist Saeed Muhammad Ritzvi explains on apostasy that while Islam does not compel religious conversion, after one converts, they must stay the course. And he writes, why does Islam not allow apostasy? Apostasy or irtidad in Islam is equal to treason. Therefore, the apostate must be executed. And I think this should explain to you the concept of state and religion are completely wedded together in Islam, so that if you have a problem with your religion, you have a problem with the state. If you give up your religion, you by definition have committed treason against the state. So, generally speaking, the punishment is execution. But some schools do allow the female apostate to be locked up and basically flogged every 3 days until she returns to the faith. All right, so in conclusion, this brief essay is meant to expose a fascinating topic in Islamic law, apostasy, but really I'm trying to explain to you how Sharia is conceived. And so the issue for Afghanistan and Afghanis is say three. First, much of the populace transitioned into Western mores and ethics. Feminism is omnipresent, for example. Second, Sharia is really the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution to these traditionalists. It is their whole reason of being. Third, a fair application of Sharia is difficult at best. There is no doctrine of due process, and nor is there a Western-style confrontational law system. So in our legal system, it is confrontational. It's a continuation of the old knights, the battle of the knights, when people would have a dispute with somebody else, they'd hire a knight to fight for them. So it's a fight in the court system. So it doesn't really contain checks and balances. And so I argue, and I believe from my knowledge, that the Taliban will absolutely return to Sharia immediately because it is their raison d'etre, which is technically defined as the main dish in a French meal, but it's the purpose of life. In other words, the entire reason to become Taliban in the first place is to represent God by announcing and enforcing Sharia. So, I end this. Sorry, liberals, but trying to defeat traditional Islam is just like pushing back against an encroaching glacier. You've picked yet another unwinnable war. All right, so... Okay, and I've got a couple of more weird news stories for you. One, 5-month-old baby killed in freak bird attack, and an Australian girl attacked by a magpie, and she was remembered as a stunning little ray of light. And they said the joy Mia brought to all of our lives cannot be described in words, but certainly felt in all our hearts. And it occurred one Sunday afternoon after Simone was accosted by one of the Oreo colored birds while carrying a 5-month-old through Glendiman Park and Holland Park West in Brisbane, Queensland. The mother reportedly tripped and fell while trying to avoid the dive-bombing birds, causing the baby Mia to sustain critical head injuries, and the kid was rushed to the hospital and died. And a beautiful little girl, big blue eyes. So it's a swooping season, and it is just totally bizarre. And anyway, so I mean, whatever happened to shotguns, but all right, so 7 hitchhikers struck by lightning on North Carolina's Grandfather Mountain. It's a really unbelievable looking mountain. You should look it up, Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina. And a lightning strike hit 7 hikers on a trail in North Carolina, injuring 4 of them. And Grandfather Mountain's McRae Peak fast-moving store came in. And it seems like this has been going all across the United States this year, these fast-moving storms. And there's just been a lot of lightning strikes, so it doesn't say anybody died. And here is the raison d'etre of... Here is this totally bizarre story. Woman claims she's married to Michael Jackson's ghost. He stays possessed in me, and this is from August 17th, so... couple of days ago. Kathleen Roberts, a woman who claims to be Marilyn Monroe reincarnate, although you wouldn't know it by looking at her, believes she's married to the king of pop, Wacko Jacko. And she says that Jackson's ghostly presence doesn't have sex with her. However, he likes to use her earthly body to dance, sing, and eat. And by the looks of it, Jackson is looking to eat more than anything else. Alongside a video, she revealed the Billie Jean singer proposed to her clairvoyantly with a pink engagement ring, which unfortunately never materialized. And she believes that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. officiated at the marriage as she was getting out of a bathtub, if you can imagine. How inconvenient. And she says, Michael stays in me all the time, so he comes to the restroom with me and calls these special bonding moments toiletries. And don't forget, Jackson died June 2009 at 50. And he stays possessed in me and relaxed, not channeling, and just enjoying living through me and communicating with me as a husband. And she says he likes to eat in me. He loves cookies. He cusses a lot more than I'd expect him to as a former fan. And Roberts admits that she was once diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she says that Michael does not like being touched back. He scares me with spider visions and dead corpse visions if I kiss him or try to initiate romance physically. He's very bossy and points things out like flaws and mistakes I make. I assume he got that from his father, so I try to overlook that because I love him, and I'm not perfect either. She feels special that he chose her to be the wife. And we have our ups and downs, but Michael, the truth is, I just can't stop loving you. So anyway, thanks for tuning in to Knockout Radio, Kelly O'Connell. And give me a thumbs up. Give me an addition. Join in, and I hope you have a good day, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Ciao.